Let's begin. Murder can be a very complicated issue. And it is because it is such a complicated issue that I have decided that I will cover every single murder case I can find documented online in this video series, going in chronological order from oldest to the newest. So let's begin all the way back 430,000 years ago. The prospect of murder has always been a part of life. Some may believe it to be a more modern phenomenon, but that is not and has never been the case. As some of you may know, the modern human came into existence about 200,000 years ago, but our thirst for blood didn't arrive with us, because our ancestors also brought deliberate death upon their own. In 2015, paleontologists discovered a cracked human skull in what is called the Pit of Bones cave in Spain. After piecing the skull together, they noticed something. The skull had two holes identical to each other, which pointed them to the conclusion that this was a 430,000-year-old murder mystery. In fact, it was the oldest. The skull had been found at the bottom of a cave shaft, and so the crime scene indicates that the victim was struck twice in the head with an ancient Stone Age weapon, which caused the victim to die. The killer or killers then threw their fresh kill down the cave shaft, leaving his body to be found many years later. The motive for this case is hard to determine, since life in general was hard back then, and the probability of this case being solved is probably non-existent. Approximately 50,000 years ago, in a remote area of what today is known as Iraq, a male Neanderthal aged between 40 and 50 years old was killed by being stabbed in his ribs by what could have been an early sign of interspecies warfare, as the modern humans by that point had emerged. Shanidar III, as the victim has been named, could have possibly had the wound strike him after being hit by a projectile weapon. Parts of the weapon that killed Shanidar III would have been embedded in his ribs, causing him a lot of suffering before he days after finally succumbed to his injuries. This is yet another case of history proving that our ancestors had a taste for blood as well. Nataruk by Lake Turkana in Kenya was once the site of a brutal massacre. Hunter-gatherer societies from the pre-ancient world rarely had too much bloodshed, But 10,000 years ago, men, women, and children would be brutally killed and thrown into a pit of their rotting relatives. 12 skeletons was found at the site. Half of them was children. 10 of the victims had been severely beaten in the head, crushing their skulls. A few skeletons had obsidian blades lodged in their craniums. 2 of the dead did not show any sign of violent trauma, but they had instead been bound and left to die. One of these victims was a pregnant woman who had her hands and feet bound, but showed no signs of visible trauma. What motivated this act of brutality will most likely never be known, but science points to there being a conflict between 2 groups rather than an internal conflict within one group or family. This conclusion has been drawn for the use of arrows that held the obsidian blades, and for the disrespectful manner in which the bodies were dumped. Thank you for watching this video. I will continue on with this series. I hope you stay and I hope you enjoy. Good night.